August 14, 1957. Cotton Club, Harlem. A white mobster named Vincent Russo raised his hand and slapped Bumpy Johnson's 15-year-old nephew across the face in front of 200 witnesses. The boy's crime? Bumping into Russo's table while serving drinks. What happened next made every Italian family in New York hold emergency meetings for 3 straight days. The sound echoed through the club. Conversations stopped. The jazz band fell silent mid-note. Young Marcus Johnson stood frozen, his cheek burning red, tears forming in his eyes. Vincent Russo laughed, turned to his crew of 8 men, and said those 6 words that sealed his fate: "Learn your place in my city." Nobody moved. The club owner, Big Mike, knew exactly what was coming. He'd seen this pattern before. Bumpy Johnson didn't react to disrespect with anger. He reacted with mathematics. Cold, calculated, devastating mathematics. Mike immediately walked to his office, locked the door, and started making calls. Not to the police. Not to other club owners. To funeral homes. Marcus ran home that night, his face still stinging, his pride shattered. He didn't want to tell anyone. He knew what his uncle was capable of. But in Harlem, secrets lasted about as long as ice cream in August. By midnight, 47 people had already called Bumpy's apartment. By morning, the entire neighborhood knew. By noon, Bumpy Johnson was sitting in his favorite booth at Lenox Lounge, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, looking completely calm. If you want the full truth about what Bumpy did next, hit like so this story reaches more people who need to understand real power. Vincent Russo had been operating in Harlem for 6 months. He worked for the Genovese family, collecting protection money from businesses along Lenox Avenue. The Italian mobs had been trying to expand into Harlem for years, testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing how far they could go before Bumpy Johnson pushed back. But one man always stood in their way. Bumpy Johnson controlled 43 blocks, employed over 300 people, and had connections that reached from street corners to City Hall to police precincts to judges' chambers. More importantly, he had something the Italians never understood, something that couldn't be taught in their backroom meetings or learned through intimidation. Respect that couldn't be bought, only earned through years of fair dealing and genuine care for the community. Russo represented everything the old mob families wanted. Territory, money, fear, control, expansion. They sent him specifically because he had a reputation for violence that preceded him like a storm cloud. He'd broken legs in Little Italy, sent 3 men to the hospital with fractured skulls. He'd burned businesses in the Bronx that refused to pay, watched the owners cry as decades of work went up in flames. He'd threatened families, children, grandmothers, anyone connected to someone who defied him. The Genovese family thought his methods would work in Harlem. They thought wrong. They fundamentally misunderstood what made Harlem different, what made Bumpy Johnson different, what made the entire dynamic different from anything they'd encountered before. 3 days before the Cotton Club incident, Russo had walked into Jenkins' barbershop on 125th Street. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, like it had done for 10,000 customers over 38 years. He demanded $200 weekly protection money, standing in the middle of the shop while 3 customers sat frozen in their chairs, waiting to see what would happen. Mr. Jenkins, 72 years old, had been cutting hair in that same spot for 38 years, since he was 34 and full of dreams about building something that mattered. He'd cut hair through the Depression, through World War II, through every change Harlem had seen. He looked at Russo with eyes that had seen everything, smiled politely like he was dealing with a confused child, and said 5 words that changed everything: "I already pay Bumpy Johnson." Russo slapped him too. Knocked his glasses clean off his face, sent them skittering across the black and white checkered floor, one lens cracking when it hit the metal leg of a barber chair. The 3 customers didn't move. They just watched, memorizing every detail, knowing this story would spread through Harlem like wildfire. Mr. Jenkins stood up slowly, touched his face where the slap had landed, picked up his broken glasses, and said something that should have warned Russo about what was coming. He said, "You just made a mistake that will follow you forever." Russo laughed, walked out, collected protection money from 4 more businesses that day. Never realized he just started a countdown to his own destruction. That was mistake number 1. You could operate in Harlem. You could run numbers, sell liquor, even move some product. But you never, ever put your hands on the people Bumpy protected. Mr. Jenkins was like family. And now, Russo had slapped actual family. Comment justice if you believe Russo crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The morning after the Cotton Club incident, Bumpy made 12 phone calls. Not threats. Not warnings. Just information gathering. Where does Russo live? Where does he eat? Where does he collect money? Who does he trust? What time does he start his day? What time does he end it? Bumpy spent 3 hours on the phone, writing everything down in a small black notebook. His wife, Mamie, watched from the kitchen doorway. She'd seen this before. The calm before the execution. Russo, meanwhile, was celebrating. He thought slapping Marcus Johnson was a power move. He told his crew that Bumpy was finished, that the old man was too scared to respond, that Harlem was theirs for the taking. He even raised his protection rates by $50. 11 businesses paid without question, terrified of what he'd do next. But Russo didn't notice something crucial. Not a single business owned by someone connected to Bumpy paid anything. They just smiled, nodded, and said they'd have the money next week. August 17th. 3 days after the slap. Russo woke up at 7 in the morning like always. He walked to his corner store, bought his newspaper and cigarettes like always. He got into his black Cadillac like always. He turned the key. The engine started perfectly. Nothing exploded. No ambush. No gunshots. Russo actually laughed. He thought Bumpy Johnson was all reputation and no action. But Bumpy Johnson didn't operate like other gangsters. He didn't need explosions or bullets to make his point. He needed something much more powerful. Absence. Type yes if you want to see what happened when an entire neighborhood disappeared. That same morning, something strange started happening across Harlem. Russo drove to his first collection spot, Mario's restaurant on 131st Street. Sign on the door, family emergency. He drove to his second spot, the pharmacy on Lenox Avenue. Unexpected circumstances. Third spot, the dry cleaner. Fourth spot, the newsstand. Fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. Every single business on his collection route was closed. Russo's confusion turned to anger. He started banging on doors, demanding people open up. Nobody answered. He looked through windows and saw people inside, just standing there, staring at him, not moving. He pulled his gun and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed down the empty street. Nothing changed. The people inside the buildings just watched him like he was already dead. By noon, Russo realized something worse. The restaurants that served him breakfast wouldn't seat him. The barbershop that cut his hair had no available chairs, despite being completely empty. The store that sold him cigarettes was suddenly out of stock. The bar where his crew met every evening was closed for renovations that started that exact morning. Even the gas station refused to fill his tank. The attendant just pointed at a broken pump that had been working perfectly 10 minutes earlier. Bumpy Johnson had done something no gangster had ever done before. He made an entire neighborhood choose sides. And Harlem chose Bumpy. Share this video so communities understand what real organized power looks like. August 18th. 4 days after the slap. Russo's crew started falling apart. 2 of his guys quit and left New York entirely. 3 more stopped answering his calls. The remaining 3 showed up to his apartment that morning looking terrified. One of them, Tommy Greco, was shaking so badly he could barely light his cigarette. He told Russo that his grandmother, who'd lived in Little Italy her entire life for 73 years, received a visit from a well-dressed black man who simply said, "Mrs. Greco, your grandson is making poor choices. I thought you should know." That well-dressed man was Bumpy Johnson. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand. He didn't even raise his voice above a polite conversation level. He just provided information to a grandmother who loved her grandson. But the message was crystal clear. Nobody was safe. Not in Harlem. Not in Little Italy. Not in Brooklyn. Not anywhere in the 5 boroughs. Tommy told Russo something else too. His grandmother called him immediately after Bumpy left, crying, begging him to leave New York. She said she'd never been so scared in her life, Not because Bumpy threatened her, but because he didn't have to. The respect in his voice, the gentle way he spoke, the fact that he knew exactly where she lived and chose to visit in broad daylight wearing a three-piece suit, it all communicated something far more terrifying than any threat. This was a man who could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Russo tried to act tough. He told Tommy to man up, told him his grandmother was overreacting, told him they'd get through this. But his hands were shaking when he poured his morning whiskey. It was 8 in the morning and he was already drinking. That's when you know a man is truly scared, when he needs liquid courage before breakfast. The phone in Russo's apartment rang 6 times that morning. He answered the first 3 calls. Wrong numbers, all of them. Or were they? The 4th call, he let it ring. The 5th call, he unplugged the phone entirely. The 6th call came from a payphone downstairs in his building's lobby. He could hear it ringing through his floor. Someone wanted him to know they were close. Someone wanted him to know they could reach him whenever they wanted. Russo finally understood. He wasn't fighting a gang. He was fighting an institution. Bumpy Johnson had spent 30 years building relationships, earning trust, creating a network so deep that entire families moved as one unit. You couldn't intimidate that. You couldn't buy that. You couldn't destroy that with violence. August 19th. 5 days after the slap. Russo received a message. Not a phone call. Not a letter. A visit. At 2 in the afternoon, 3 men in perfect suits knocked on his apartment door. They weren't Bumpy's men. They were from the Genovese family. The same family that sent Russo to Harlem in the first place. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Russo packed his bags within the hour. The men didn't sit down. They didn't accept the drink Russo offered. They stood in his doorway like executioners waiting for the sentence to be carried out. The oldest one, a man named Salvatore who'd been with the family for 32 years, did all the talking. He spoke in Italian first, then switched to English so there'd be no misunderstanding, no room for interpretation, no chance Russo could claim he didn't fully comprehend. "You embarrassed us," Salvatore said. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he'd given this speech 100 times before. "You went into a territory we have an understanding about. You put your hands on people under another man's protection. You made us look weak, stupid, and disrespectful. Do you understand what you've done?" Russo tried to defend himself. He explained that he was just following orders, establishing dominance, showing the families that Harlem could be taken. Salvatore held up one finger. Russo stopped talking immediately. That's how you knew someone had real authority. One finger could silence a room. "Bumpy Johnson," Salvatore continued, "could have killed you 17 different ways in the last 5 days. He could have had you shot, stabbed, poisoned, pushed in front of a train, drowned in the Hudson, or simply disappeared into a basement somewhere. Instead, he made you irrelevant. He erased you without touching you. Do you understand how much more powerful that is?" Russo didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Salvatore explained something Russo should have learned before he ever set foot in Harlem. The 5 families had spent 40 years trying to break Bumpy Johnson. They'd sent collectors, enforcers, negotiators, and even assassins. None of it worked. Not because Bumpy was impossible to kill, but because killing him would start a war that nobody could win. Harlem would burn. The families would lose millions in revenue. Blood would run in the streets for months, maybe years. All because one Italian wanted to prove he was tougher than one black man who'd earned more respect in 30 years than most gangsters earned in 3 lifetimes. If this level of strategic thinking shocked you, comment legend below. The men from the Genovese family explained something Russo should have known from the beginning. The 5 families had an unofficial understanding with Bumpy Johnson. They could operate in their territories. He could operate in his. Nobody crossed those lines without permission. Russo had crossed the line. Worse, he'd embarrassed the Genovese family by being so publicly defeated without a single bullet fired. The families held emergency meetings because Bumpy's response proved something terrifying. He didn't need violence to control territory. He had something more powerful than guns or money. He had love. The kind where people would rather close their businesses and lose money than betray the man who'd protected them for decades. August 20th. 6 days after the slap. Vincent Russo left New York City. He moved to Miami, changed his name, and never spoke about Harlem again. His departure wasn't announced. No goodbye party. No final collection rounds. He simply vanished like morning fog. The businesses on his old route reopened the next day. Life continued exactly as it had before, except now everyone knew. There were gangsters, and then there was Bumpy Johnson. Marcus Johnson, the 15-year-old nephew, returned to work at the Cotton Club that same week. On his first shift back, every customer left him a tip. Small tips, $5 or $10, but they added up. By the end of the night, Marcus had $263 in his pocket. Nobody mentioned the slap. Nobody asked if he was okay. They just showed him, through action, that he was family. And in Harlem, family meant everything. The Cotton Club owner, Big Mike, framed the story in his mind perfectly. Years later, he'd tell people about the week Vincent Russo learned the difference between fear and respect. Fear makes people obey when you're watching. Respect makes people stand with you even when you're not there. Bumpy never showed up at the Cotton Club that week. Never made a speech. Never fired a weapon. Never even raised his voice. He made 43 blocks of Harlem simply refuse to acknowledge that Vincent Russo existed. Big Mike would also tell people about the phone call he received from Bumpy on August 16, 2 days after the slap. Bumpy asked him one simple question: how many businesses on Lenox Avenue would close for a week if I asked them to? Big Mike didn't even have to think about his answer. All of them, he said. And he was right. Bumpy made 117 phone calls that day. Every single person said yes immediately. No questions. No hesitation. Just complete trust that whatever Bumpy was planning, it was for the right reasons. That's power that transcends violence. That's influence that outlasts threats. That's the difference between a gangster and a legend. Big Mike had seen plenty of tough guys come through Harlem over the decades. Men who could fight, men who could shoot, men who thought muscles and weapons made them powerful. But Bumpy Johnson taught him something profound. Real power isn't about what you can do to people. Real power is about what people will do for you without being asked, without being paid, without being threatened. It's about trust built over decades, one interaction at a time, one favor at a time, one moment of genuine care at a time. The way Bumpy handled the Russo situation became a case study in strategic thinking. He didn't react emotionally. He didn't seek immediate revenge. He took 3 full days to plan, to think, to consider every angle and every consequence. Most gangsters would have sent shooters within hours. Bumpy sent a message that took 5 days to fully deliver, and it was more devastating than any bullet could ever be. September 1957. 2 weeks after Russo left. Bumpy Johnson sat in his usual booth at Lenox Lounge, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, looking completely calm. Young Marcus walked in, nervous but determined, and sat across from his uncle. He wanted to thank him. Bumpy looked up from his paper, studied his nephew's face, and said 7 words that Marcus never forgot. Your family. That's the only reason needed. The Italian mobs never sent another collector to Bumpy's territory. The Genovese family officially apologized through back channels, something they'd only done twice in their entire history. And every business owner in Harlem understood something profound. Protection wasn't about who had the most guns or the most men. Protection was about who would make an entire community stand together as one. Mr. Jenkins, the 72-year-old barber who'd been slapped 3 days before Marcus, reopened his shop the week Russo left. His first customer was Bumpy Johnson. The haircut lasted 45 minutes, mostly spent in comfortable silence. When Bumpy stood to leave, he put $500 on the counter. Mr. Jenkins tried to refuse. Bumpy just smiled and said, "For the glasses." The story of Vincent Russo became legend in Harlem. Parents told their children. Business owners told their employees. Even the police whispered about it in private. A white mobster slapped Bumpy Johnson's nephew in public, and the entire family didn't show up again. Not because they were scared. Not because they were threatened. But because Bumpy Johnson proved that real power doesn't announce itself with violence. Real power makes itself known through silence, strategy, and the unwavering loyalty of people who believe in you. 40 years later, historians would study this incident as a perfect example of community organizing. Sociologists would write papers about collective action and social capital. But in Harlem, the explanation was much simpler. You don't disrespect family. You don't raise your hand against the people Bumpy Johnson protected. And you definitely don't mistake silence for weakness. Because silence, when wielded by someone with Bumpy Johnson's influence, was the loudest weapon of all. If you found this story incredible, hit that like button right now. Comment below which part shocked you the most. Was it the way Bumpy shut down Russo without violence, or how the entire neighborhood stood together? And subscribe because the next story reveals how Bumpy Johnson controlled the Harlem numbers game so perfectly that even the FBI couldn't break his system. You need to hear what happened when they finally tried.